It's always for you.
He's not listening to you.
No, he's not. Okay,
He's
now
doing
he's
his
just fucking
stupid
with
joke
us.
now.
Yes.
It's not stupid. It's hilarious. Let's be honest. That was hilarious. For a second, you both were just like, wait, are we going to have to, is he going to have to go out?
You're right. You're right. You did. Okay. Welcome to the Dispatch Podcast. You've got Sarah Isger, Steve Hayes, Jonah Goldberg, and straight from Iowa, Andrew Egger on the ground. Andrew, I was going to, well, hold on.
Did you have to drag his sexual orientation into this?
I want to get to what's going on in Yemen and the Houthis, but first, Andrew, can you just tell us a little about the weather in Iowa right now?
So it's nuts. We got about 4 inches of snow overnight in Des Moines, with a lot more to come. It's extremely cold, in the teens. It's going to be colder by tonight, so it's all extremely powdery. And we're supposed to have gusts of wind up to about 45 miles an hour in Des Moines and east of here this afternoon. So I mean, they usually do a really good job, even with a lot of snow in the winter in Iowa, keeping roads clear. But I mean, the Department of Transportation has said they may not even be trying for a lot of roads, this afternoon until the wind dies down. Because what's the point? You've got interstate closures already with some jackknifed semis east of Des Moines. So all the presidential campaigns, they're all out here. We're only 3 days from the caucuses. But they're all, dealing with it best they can. DeSantis had one event this morning before the wind really picked up in Ankeny, which is about half an hour north of Des Moines. Nikki Haley's already taken all her stuff offline, or online rather, today. No in-person events for Haley. Vivek Ramaswamy, he's made bad driving decisions part of his campaign brand this week. Like, it's like none of the other guys have they don't have what it takes. They don't have the stones to go fishtailing around on the interstate like my staff and I do. So he says they are doing 4 events today, which would include a drive, like a 3.5 hour drive from Fort Dodge in Northwest Iowa back to Des Moines. It's not quite as bad out west, but it's bad everywhere. So I doubt that will actually take place. They're going to at least get to their first event. Trump was back in New York yesterday for the end of his civil fraud trial, so he's not in the state right now. He's expected to fly in tomorrow, and we'll see. The winter storm warning, the blizzard warning that we have here is supposed to go into early tomorrow morning, so you could see a lot of trouble with flights, but he doesn't fly commercial. So
Andrew, is there any buzz or speculation or armchair generaling about how this kind of weather could affect the turnout from different parts of the coalitions, right? Like, I'm just spitballing here. I could be the complete opposite, but like harder to get to caucus sites in rural areas because less snow clearance, or easier to get to in suburban areas, which are better for Nikki Haley because there's more population density and there's better snow removal. I mean, is there any of that kind of stuff about how the differentials across the state can be affected in terms of turnout?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about that. What's crazy is that, this is not even the main winter event that we were all originally planning for. This has turned into what people are calling like a once in a decade storm around here, but it's actually a separate thing from the incredible cold snap that we're gonna get later in the weekend. It's all this snow was really only kind of figured out that it was going to be on its way a couple days ago, but the snow itself should be less of a problem by Monday. Once the winds die down, like I said, they're very good at getting the roads clear around here. They do it all the time. So the bigger problem, at least right now, what we expect the bigger problem to be come Monday night is just really, really insane cold, with temperatures under zero, wind chill as low as -20, -30. So it's less about people being unable to get to their cars, and more like, some cars won't start when the weather's that cold. Some people won't want to venture out. Older people are the group that seems likeliest to be affected, because I heard somebody say yesterday, it's going to be a question whether people are like, is this going to be my last caucus if I go out and try to caucus in weather like this? And it varies a lot. There's thousands of caucus locations around the state. Some are easier to get to than others. A lot of them, you just, you park and you walk 10 feet and you're in the building. Others, it's a little trickier and it kind of pulls in a lot of the kind of caucus organization that these campaigns have been doing for weeks and months. Some places have infrastructure set up to drive people to the sites if they might not be able to have their own transportation, things like that. But it's a totally open question, and it adds a lot of variance into the expectations. I don't know if anybody has strong theories on who it's likeliest to hurt or help.
I've got a theory. It will make no difference because Iowa caucus goers, this is their identity. And they will be at the caucus, and you will not see any real drop off from any coalition.
I got a question for you about that, Sarah.
Yeah.
So I generally agree with you, which is why, like, you would think really just stipulate really terrible weather, right?
Yeah.
That is going to deter low propensity Iowa caucus goers far more than high propensity, right? So, like,
correct. But there's no such thing. But okay.
Well, my understanding is that, like, I keep hearing from both pro and con sides how Trump has brought all these new people into the Republican Party, and it's this, and it's the Alex Jones types or the young college non-college educated people. If they've never been to one before, it doesn't feel like a betrayal of their civic duty to not go to one again, right? But I could be wrong. I mean, he's
just not relying. I just disagree that that's where his support is coming from, or that he's relying on first-time caucus goers to pull this out.
No, but not to win. I just mean, like, the scope. The only thing we're talking about here for Trump is his margin of victory, right? A narrow one is bad for his narrative. Over 50% is will knock out DeSantis, that kind of stuff.
But let me throw this out to you, which is that, sure, the most marginal caucus goers may be Trump people, but so are the most rabid caucus goers.
Sure.
So I guess I could see that hurting on the margin. I could see it actually hurting Vivek more than anyone else, because he's the most likely to have sort of younger caucus goers who are
die on the road today.
Yeah. Well, think of how much practice all his fans will have, getting out to in these horrible conditions by Monday night. They'll be practicing all weekend.
There was, it's been 8 years since I was out on the campaign trail, and there was a blizzard in Iowa. I mean, it's unusual maybe to the extent it's happening 3 days before the caucus, but it's not unusual to have a blizzard hitting the campaign trail in Iowa. So all the roads were shut down, but we still had one of those candidate forum events. And so we're crossing the road over to the candidate event. We've gone across the street in Des Moines to get some sushi because Des Moines is known for its fresh fish. And I was in Little Ballet Flats, which is super smart in blizzard conditions, as we all know. And I just went straight back on the ground, hit my head square on the pavement, was out.
This explains a lot.
Yeah, like full concussion right outside the event location. And, the show just had to go on. We didn't tell Carly that I had a concussion until after the event because we were worried that she would insist on medical attention, which was simply not going to happen. And I was not interested in that. So we told her after the event. She then immediately in the car on the way back to the hotel got on my laptop, went to Nordstrom.com and found me sort of weather appropriate but still stylish black boots that had rubber soles and insisted that I purchase them right then and there. And I still have those shoes. And you know what? They are great in the snow. I highly recommend them. Iowa is a rite of passage.
Did
Steve,
you
what's
ever
your take
receive medical attention?
No, of course not. That's not how the caucus works.
So this explains why ever since you've forgotten the letter L. It's a weird micro problem,
Steve, what's your take? 3 days out from the Iowa caucus. Do you think the polling's right? Do you think the weather changes anything? Do you think Chris Christie dropping out changes something in Iowa? Donald Trump showing up and speaking when he wasn't supposed to at his civil trial? The immunity DC circuit argument? I mean, any of this change anything for you?
No.
Yeah, that's
I think the biggest change, I mean, it's interesting. If you go back to what we all thought of as sort of the beginning of the race, when it was sort of clear that Ron DeSantis was likely to get in, the basic contours of the race started to take shape. We had several discussions here internally about how Iowa was likely to be, everything, make or break, all or nothing. You had all these candidates who were likely to focus on Northwest Iowa as a place where there's a heavy concentration of evangelical voters. It's a sort of dense voting base for the Iowa Republican caucus every 4 years. And that was a place that Ron DeSantis was likely to try to peel away some voters because of some things that Donald Trump had said about abortion. Tim Scott was, is an evangelical Christian himself, thought that he might be able to make inroads there. And we had several discussions. I actually thought about getting on the road to go write a piece that was sort of like, is it all about Iowa? And what's interesting, for all the reasons you laid out, Sarah, Iowa's setting up to be a lot less interesting than New Hampshire because Ron DeSantis' campaign has sort of collapsed. Doesn't mean that he couldn't put up he couldn't surprise on the upside if the ground game that we've heard about from DeSantis world is as good as they claim it is. Maybe that helps get people to the polls, particularly when there might be diminished turnout because of the weather. But in all likelihood, I mean, it'd be hard. It's hard to see him surprising on the upside in a way that matters. And with Christie getting out, Nikki Haley continuing to pull well in New Hampshire really looks like a place where if there's a surprise or if there's any change to the trajectory of the race, that's likely where it'll be.
So I think it's worth expanding on that a little because I've gotten questions about when DeSantis drops out of the race, does he run out of money, things like that. First of all, there's no more running out of money for major campaigns anymore. In 2008, right, Tim Pawlenty ran out of money and it was a big deal. Even in 2016, Scott Walker was running out of money when he dropped out. That's just not going to be an issue anymore in this era of very large super PACs, small dollar fundraising. You may drop out because the money has slowed or something, but you're not literally out of money the way that you used to be. I mean, Tim Pawlenty was in debt by the time that he dropped out of that race in 2008. So no, there's not going to be something driving him out of the race. But primaries are about expectations. And so DeSantis has to come in second in Iowa in order to meet expectations. So does Nikki Haley. And that's where the drama comes in, right? Like the expectation is for both of them to come in second. Haley has to then win New Hampshire. The problem for DeSantis is even if he comes in second in Iowa, there's no real expectation for him in New Hampshire. There's no expectation coming after that. And so the question to when does DeSantis drop out is sort of like, well, I don't know why he's still in because I'm unclear of the path that they're arguing their expectations are. And then in terms of like, okay, well, let's say he comes in third in Iowa, does he drop out? Yeah, maybe. But again, why is he in today? Why, not meeting the expectations heading into New Hampshire doesn't really matter in a sense for him. I think the more interesting question is for Haley, assume she comes in second in Iowa, then New Hampshire. Like, what if New Hampshire's tight, but she doesn't come in first, so she doesn't quite meet the expectation and comes in lower? That's where I could see this getting dragged out. But the problem for all these campaigns is there's not really what comes next after New Hampshire. The Haley team has talked about South Carolina, but the polling in South Carolina isn't good. The other thing I thought would be fun to talk about is what does a ground game look like for an Iowa caucus? And it is crazy. I mean, it's quite literal that they will drive people to the caucus. They'll be calling individual people, showing up at their homes. I mean, this is a true get out the vote operation that's not just phone banks. It is a ground game. So expect all of these campaigns to just flood the zone with volunteers and people moving humans into caucus sites. And so in that sense, again, when you talk about expectations, the expectation is that every campaign will do that and that all of their people are going to show up because they're going to drag them out of bed and get them there. And that's where I do think that, the polling, particularly the, sort of good Iowa pollsters polling, regardless of weather, is probably likely to be right, in which case you've got Trump finishing number 1 easily, Haley finishing number 2, tightly followed by DeSantis. That I think is the best expectation going into Monday. Does anyone disagree with that?
One thing that I have heard a couple times while I've been out here is that because the get out the vote is going to be so important, and especially in these conditions, that might be the one area where DeSantis does still have a pretty significant leg up over Haley, just because he's gone crazy in organizationally in the state. Whereas Haley, I mean, she came into Iowa a lot later. I think it was kind of a strategic change for her once DeSantis kind of collapsed, and it kind of became clear that she might actually be able to get that knockout punch here rather than just waiting to New Hampshire to pass him. But a lot of her get out the vote, rather a lot of the pre get out the vote stuff has been done, by the Koch network that endorsed her a few months back and kind of put that operation into place. I've never worked on a campaign. I can't say, like how difficult or easy that makes coordinating the day of stuff. But DeSantis has a major operation here. And I think, to your question about why hasn't he dropped out yet, I mean, I think a big part of it is just that they have this sort of doctrinaire thinking that, okay, who can really trust the polls? We don't really trust the polls. We know we have 100 million people on the ground ready to get any voter who's ever thought about Ron DeSantis to a caucus site, and we're just going to roll the dice on Monday and see what happens there.
Steve, assume that Haley finishes a distant second in Iowa. Does it help her heading into New Hampshire? Does that build momentum, or are the Trump people able to shut that down with their own narrative / Fox News / the Trump industrial complex?
They'll try. I mean, to a certain extent, it depends on how people like us and others talk about it. But I think because of what Andrew said, because this wasn't really, and I was never considered to be sort of a strong place for her to play. And she didn't have much of an operation to speak of 6-8 weeks ago. I think if she vanquishes Ron DeSantis, who's lived in Iowa, I mean, they've been very clear. They're basing their campaign on Iowa. He did the 99 county thing, the full Chuck Grassley. They've been out seeking caucus commitments for literally months, for a long time, and they've sort of put it all on Iowa. So I think I don't think she has to come in second. I think if she's close to a guy who comes in second because he's lived there forever, she's just going on to New Hampshire anyway. So I think there's not a lot of pressure on these results. I think they can be overinterpreted. I mean, if she lost to DeSantis 13-12, people are really going to say, "Oh, that's a loss for Nikki Haley. Boy, she's out now." The momentum that she seems to have built in New Hampshire is sort of worthless because she lost by 1 point to Ron DeSantis in Iowa, who's lived there forever. And if she wins by 1 point, I think the same. They've got a better spin. I think the Haley team, they could say we beat somebody who's been here forever and who sort of staked his campaign on Iowa. But I don't know. I don't think those are that significant differences.
Yeah, going back to the premise of Sarah's question for a second, I kind of disagree with Steve. I mean, I think if Nikki outside the margin of error, right, like 3 points, 4 points, beats DeSantis by coming in second, the story isn't Nikki came in second to Trump. The story is Nikki beat DeSantis, right?
Correct.
And it's what do you guys call with your bookies when you bet like 5 different games? The only way this is going to work is with a parlay, right? Yeah. And what they've got to do is basically what Nikki Haley would have to do is if she beats DeSantis, Trump comes down on her like a ton of bricks, Nikki's then got to decide, am I running for vice president or president? Because that's going to influence how she fights back. And if she can elicit, forget the parlay, dynamic scoring, as we used to say when we were for pro-growth economic policies, you have to hope that she elicits a response from Trump that benefits her. Trump is, as the former campaign manager for Carly Fiorina might be able to attest, Trump doesn't always deal with inconvenient women well. And he can...
I love that band name, though. Inconvenient Women.
And
yes.
He can elicit sympathy for women because he's less than chivalrous. And so she could bait him into some sort of thing that actually makes her even more of a hero. She wins New Hampshire, which I think is very possible. And then she's got to make the Biden argument in South Carolina. So remember, Biden was looking like he was going to be out by South Carolina. And the Democrats said, slow your roll, people. Any of these other people, they're going to lose against Donald Trump. So you got to get serious about what voting is for here and vote for Joe Biden because he's the guy who can beat Trump. In South Carolina, if Nikki can't make a similar argument that in her home state, right, where she was two-term governor, if she can't make the case that you need to vote for me over Donald Trump because I can beat Biden, then by the time then Sarah's right. The second you get to Super Tuesday, it's all over. So, South Carolina is her Fort Sumter, right? It's got to be or her Alamo or whatever.
Fort Sumter?
Fort Sumter's wrong. Yeah.
And also,
was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? But anyway, that's the parlay.
The Alamo thing also is a bit of a mess because everyone does die at the Alamo. You know that, right?
Yeah. But remembered well.
If it's her Alamo, that doesn't turn out well.
Fair enough. It's her St. Crispin's Day. The Battle of Agincourt. There you go. But no, my point is, it's all there. If she doesn't,
Agincourt is a real turn of phrase.
So anyway, you get the point. It's a lot of ifs there for anyone to pull this out because it does look like Trump's going to take it all.
Can I add one thing on, because you briefly mentioned it, the Trump coming down on Haley like a sack of bricks, that is going to be really ugly. It's the stuff with DeSantis has already been plenty ugly, and DeSantis is a guy who is liked by a huge portion of Trump's base, and he's still, he hit him on everything. And they, Nikki Haley, they are gearing up to make her, so much more hated than Mitt Romney, so much more hated than Liz Cheney. When I was at Turning Point USA conference a month or so ago in Arizona, it was already there. They were just, she was easily the most reviled rhino establishment cuck on stage for speaker after speaker after speaker, which is funny because that's not really her history or her record,
right.
But that's the role that they have assigned to her. And if she becomes a real threat, it's gonna be a brutal thing.
They're already starting with the birther stuff with her.
Oh, I know that's fringe compared to what I think we'll see after New Hampshire. If she were to win New Hampshire, it will be correctly because independents in the state decided to vote in the Republican primary because there isn't a Democratic primary, and they're less likely to support Trump, more likely to support Haley, I think. So if she wins, they'll say it's because Democrats supported her, not Republicans. Again, that's not totally true. It'll be independents, not Democrats. But, that should be a good thing because, this is all to win a general election where the independents actually do get to vote. We don't, put them away for the evening. And yet, it's very easy to see how that attack will really resonate with Republican primary voters in other states, that she's trying to steal the Republican primary. The Democrats are trying to have their candidate to choose from. So you'll have Joe Biden and then Joe Biden light Nikki Haley. Again, I want to be clear. That's not my take. I'm saying that's what the message will be. And I think that'll be very hard coming out of New Hampshire. If, as you say, Steve, for instance, Trump wins Iowa by a lot. Maybe she even comes in a competitive third in Iowa, then wins New Hampshire. That's going to be hard.
Yeah, I think it will be. I think one of the other open questions is whether Trump claims that the New Hampshire primary was stolen. We've already seen in advance of the Iowa caucus, and where Trump is not. I mean, I don't think anybody alive thinks Trump is going to lose the Iowa caucuses. And yet his team is sending out mailers suggesting that Ron DeSantis has rigged the Iowa caucuses. You know, in the old days, if we were using sort of more traditional ways of political analysis, we would say, boy, Trump risks being the boy who cried wolf here. If he's claiming that the Iowa caucuses are going to be rigged and then he wins them by a lot, will anybody believe him when he says New Hampshire was rigged if he loses? And I just don't think those rules really apply. And we can bet that if Trump loses New Hampshire, he will say that it was stolen, and he'll raise all sorts of questions, and that'll be part of the messaging. And, you know, I think they would, the Trump team would use that in South Carolina to say, look, it's really important that everybody go out and vote because, you know, we know that she's going to try to rig the election there. She's the former governor. She's the establishment. They always cheat. So I think Trump will try to use that as motivation. I mean, the real question, take the long view here. I mean, Sarah, you pointed out before, following South Carolina, Nevada, you've got Super Tuesday states that are overwhelmingly red, which set up very well for Donald Trump, right? He's very popular in a lot of the states that we're going to see on Super Tuesday. So the real question is, and I'd be interested in how each of you see this, would a win, let's say she comes in a stronger second than people expect. I mean, this is all an expectations game. So, you know, could she come out of Iowa saying, with people saying she did better than anybody expected, and this is really a two-person race, whether DeSantis actually gets out or not? I would think he probably would to save some future viability, as damaged as he would be. But she comes out of Iowa. People are saying this is effectively a two-person race. She wins New Hampshire. Is that enough? You know, let's say by 5 points, which I don't think is likely, but for the purposes of this discussion, is the only thing that could change the long-term outcome of the race, I think at this point, aside from potential legal issues, is does that change the dynamic? Do voters then think about this differently? Do the voters who have said for months that they're open to a Trump alternative, that they you know, remember the Trump presidency and those times, well, aside from the tweets, do those people say, actually, there's another person who could beat Joe Biden in the fall, and I'm tired of the chaos, to use the Haley term? Can the dynamic change that way? I think that's sort of the fundamental question of the Republican primary.
Andrew, I've got a question for you. Chris Christie dropped out this week. His speech was carried live by most cable news, certainly talked about in our neck of the woods. Is anyone on the ground talking about Chris Christie, about what he said, or about the effect he had on the race?
It's a little hard to know the effect he had, just because in Iowa in particular, he was never a factor. He never came here. He never spent money here. So it's not like he was a big part of constellation in the minds of Iowa voters. I'll tell you, at the Trump town hall on Tuesday or on Wednesday night, he was brought up a few times because Donald Trump, I mean, it was kind of an energizing moment for Trump backers, you know, another one bites the dust sort of situation. But as far as, like, you know, the Nikki voter, the DeSantis voter, the kind of stereotypical caucus goer, who you were talking about before, who's the kind of person who sizes up every candidate and tries to hit every event. I mean, Christie has not made a pitch for that voter at all in Iowa this cycle. So very little here. But I imagine as we turn the corner next week, we'll have Mike Warren reporting from New Hampshire, and I'm sure he'll have a lot to say to you on that.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Where are you staying in Iowa?
Oh, I'm just hanging out with my aunt and uncle in Urbandale.
Oh, because we can see you here, and it's like not a hotel room. There's cabinetry and things on the counter.
A better place than a hotel room to get completely snowed in, if in fact that is what ends up happening today.
Also, a degree of frugality that management at the Dispatch highly appreciates.
It's not the Urbandale Ritz. and I have met said aunt and uncle, and they're wonderful people. I think that the same people we had.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Do your aunt and uncle have a go-to casserole that's particularly delicious that you're getting while you're snowed in Urbandale?
That's a good question. They made chili the other night. It was good. But I don't know about casserole. That's a little
Do
bit
they put
stereotypical.
beans in their
This
chili?
is Des Moines, Sarah. It's not Fort Dodge.
The best restaurant, I think, outside the coast of the country is actually in Davenport, Iowa. So,
Really?
suck it, Andrew. I feel very strongly about my Iowa restaurants.
I wish
There's
I
a
was in
very-
Davenport 2 weeks ago. I wish you'd told me.
Ooh.
Maybe
There's
my
a
favorite
very,
steakhouse
very-
in the country is in Montour, Iowa. Rube Steakhouse. Love that place.
There's one of the best steakhouses in a town called Lamar's that if I had made it to Iowa last weekend as I had planned, I would have eaten at Archie's Wayside, which is
I don't know. I think you guys are underestimating the
spectacular.
Pella Applebee's. You can't underestimate the Pella Applebee's. Sorry. Pella Applebee's. Wait, Andrew, very important though. Did their chili have beans in it?
Yes.
Incorrect.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean
It's
they
good.
weren't trying to impress you.
But they should be.
Beans are
They
good.
weren't,
No,
they
I
weren't
fully
bending
endorse
the knee to
Texas-
Texan
Texas
cultural
chili.
hegemony.
Nah,
It
beans
is,
are good.
That's my favorite chili too, Sarah.
Wrong.
All right, Andrew. Stay safe, drive safe, be warm, but also keep giving us lots of good information from the ground.
All right, thanks a lot, guys.
And to the extent those contradict themselves, definitely get us the information.
Right.
Yeah, we'll see how it shakes out. Thanks, guys.